He's a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Yes, he's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt.
Which brings us to the Prime Minister and the report by two select committees into his handling of the coronavirus pandemic in the earliest days. I think both of these select committees, and again, I probably should have double-checked before coming on air, I think they're both headed up by former Conservative members of Cabinet. I know Jeremy Hunt heads up the Health Select Committee. Let me double-check on that. But what I mean is that they are by no means biased. You know, you almost find yourself thinking this report is pretty damning, despite the fact that it is headed up by people who either have been or hope to be in Boris Johnson's cabinet, or at least in a Conservative cabinet at some point. It runs to 151 pages. And yes, having double-checked, I can confirm it was led by two former Conservative ministers, and it has been filed under the title Coronavirus Lessons Learned to Date. One of the earliest things to mention is that the lesson that you probably shouldn't let it run through the population in the hope of building up some semblance of herd immunity doesn't appear to have been learned, because they are currently doing that in our schools. But that is not contained within the report. 10:13 is the time. What is contained within the report is an accusation of groupthink, evidence of British exceptionalism. In many ways, if you were listening to this programme last March, you don't need to read the report. All of the stuff that we reported as fact and evidence-based criticism has now been confirmed by a report conducted by two former Conservative ministers. So what the hell has this got to do with the three things that could see me broadcasting my final programme on LBC? Well, honestly, I don't see how we have managed to create a country in which the people in charge can stand accused of such epic and fatal failure by their own colleagues and fellow party members. That seems pertinent to me. While the rest of us sit here absolutely certain that not a single head will roll. I find that actually inconceivable for fans of The Princess Bride. I really do. And it's another one of those mornings where you are the boiled frog, isn't it? It's another one of those mornings where you sort of, because it's a culmination, it's an acceleration, it's all happened incrementally. You arrive on Tuesday, the 12th of October, 2021. You know that we have one of the highest overall death rates in the world. You know that we still have, according to some measures, the highest number of new cases today. Don't talk about that anymore. But forget about the road ahead. Forget about the road beneath our feet at this moment in time. Look in the rearview mirror at the road behind. Look me in the eye and tell me you expect anybody to face punishment, never mind consequence, for an epic and fatal failure of public health on a scale that has never been seen before. Has arguably never been seen before in any civilised or comparably wealthy country. And I don't get it. I still don't get it. It's the Fifth Avenue thing. I really hope it isn't. But you remember when Donald Trump said that such is the nature of his cult, such is the unthinking sycophancy of his support, that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote? I don't know how else to make sense of the fact that we've created a country in which a government can preside over what is described by their own colleagues as one of the, and again I would dispute the use of the phrase one of the worst public health failures in UK history, with ministers and scientists taking a fatalistic approach that, and I don't like this language either, exacerbated the death toll. If you don't mind, I'll run with killed people. Political decisions that left people dead. Family members of people we were speaking to at the time and will continue to speak to for a while to come. And because your scarf, your Boris Johnson or your Conservative or your Brexit scarf is now tied so tightly round your neck, you cannot take it off. And you have to sit there and either look the other way, make ludicrous noises about how, oh, he's tried his best, it's not his fault, or just hope that everybody else moves on soon. And I hate to say this because I love you in a Christian way. It's your fault that there will be no consequences. It's your fault that there will be no punishment. It's your fault that there will be no repercussions for this. You have created an environment in which politicians are allowed to claim that it's raining when we're in the middle of a heat wave. You have created an environment in which politicians are allowed to negotiate a protocol, celebrate it, receive a seat in the House of Lords as a reward for negotiating it, and then claim 6 months later that we need to renege on it, that it's absolutely awful and we've got to get rid of it quick. You have created that environment, and I don't know how we get out of it. And I don't even think that I can ask you that question today, because I don't think you've got any answers either. Although the phone number, should you choose to have a crack, is 0345 6060973. So what is the question? The question is this. What's happened? How do you respond to the news? And I will stress repeatedly that this report has been led by two former Conservative ministers, so their scarf is at least partly the same colour as yours. How do you respond to the news that the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic was among the worst public health failures in history and killed people on an entirely avoidable scale? Question 1. How do you respond to that, particularly if you lost a loved one? 0345 6060973. And question 2, the question that I can't answer, but I would love to. How come we've ended up in a space where, regardless of how we feel about the current regime, we both know nobody will be punished for this? 0345 6060973. Feelings? More than welcome on a day like today. Facts? They're all in the report. Key among them is government decisions, political decisions killed people. How many people could you kill at work before you'd lose your job? I didn't even mention that as a reason why this could be my last ever broadcast on LBC. I could head off during the commercial break and strangle Keith. In those circumstances, it's fairly certain I would not be back at work tomorrow. Or I could make a decision that is so ludicrously stupid, dangerous, self-serving and daft that the poor fellow would fall down a lift shaft or something like that after I told him it was safe. I digress, and I don't make light of a serious subject. Well, how many people could you be responsible for the deaths for at work today without losing your job, or at least facing some form of discipline or consequence? Even if you were going to pass the buck down the line to people a little lower in the food chain. Somebody, right, would lose their job. Somebody, right, would face consequences. Somebody surely should be facing charges of manslaughter on a morning like this. But here we are. How did we get here? And how many deaths could your professional incompetence cause before somebody would be asking questions about your job? It's a rhetorical question, unless you are Prime Minister. Richard is in Edinburgh. Richard, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, mate. I spoke to you in January, probably not remember. I lost both my parents within 6 days of each other to COVID, which was as bad as you can imagine. And just watching Steve Barclay this morning on TV and various stations not even apologising, never mind he thought he was losing his job, I find absolutely galling.
Does that matter to you? Would an apology make any difference?
It would go some way. I think about mum and dad 1,000 times a day, every single day just now.
Of course you do.
And I had he talks about lessons being learned. I was fortunate enough to test positive for COVID, which I would need to go and sit with my mum as she died.
Right.
And then in the ward next door, my dad was there, and I then had to go through and tell him that she had died.
Oh, right.
So. And when I listen to people like him who have no idea, what goes on in these places, and just this morning I'm getting on with it now. But when you see him on TV this morning, not even to apologise, to take responsibility.
Well, that's the key, I think, isn't it? And obviously a fish rots from the head down, and I mean, whether you like him or loathe him, I think everyone can agree that Boris Johnson never takes responsibility for anything, including children. So the idea that Steve Barclay would somehow take responsibility for the failure to lock down quickly and therefore save many, many lives, probably not your mum and dad's, Richard. I don't know.
The thing is with that, they were in perfect health. They were 70-year-old, and they weren't shielding. They decided to shield, so they went shopping once a week, and they caught it in that way. So they've done everything I think the government asked them to do, and then Just this morning,
but it was out there. The virus was out there, and it was left to spread far too much. The reason I mentioned the relationship between apology and responsibility, so there are two types really of political responsibility and political apology, and the first involves taking actual responsibility. So you can apologise as the head of government for something that happened 100 years ago, and you're a proxy then for national responsibility. So whether it's the slave trade or sending children up chimneys, that's very different. For them to apologise for this would be to admit guilt and fault and blame, and they're not going to do that. And I don't know that would any government do that. Maybe we're being a bit optimistic in thinking any government would accept.
It would make me feel better, but the fact that you said at the end it's like they killed people. They didn't die. They killed people. And you hit the nail right in the head in your opening gambit. You said they actually killed people by their lack of action. So if that's not they can't apologise for that.
Well, the euphemism on the front page of The Guardian, which has probably the most comprehensive coverage of the story, Daily Telegraph has got a tiny little paragraph at the bottom of page 1 and then an article on page 8. The euphemism The Guardian used is exacerbated the death toll. Now, if that isn't a euphemism for killing people, then I don't really know what is. And although I hesitate to use such glib language, but nothing's going to bring mum and dad back, is it? But the idea that we all want answers, don't we? And in the absence of answers, we want someone to take responsibility for the avoidable deaths.
100%, but the fact is they don't, well, you know more than me, they don't give answers on anything. But I think in a global pandemic where there's been 130,000 deaths, you think there would be an answer. They're not getting asked difficult questions. That's the thing, they're not getting asked difficult questions, and they can't give an answer to the most simplest question. And
that's a useful nudge for me, actually, away from sort of these quite huge, highfalutin questions about why is nobody facing any consequences or how did we end up in such a hole. The answers don't have to be huge, do they? It is a media failure on an epic scale to hold them properly to account, and that has its roots in the sort of weaponisation of objective untruth that this entire government is built on.
But it's just, as I say, just that him this morning, I couldn't get away from him, from the car, from the TV.
I've only seen the Susanna Reid clips, and Susanna, one of the country's most, I don't know if underrated is a fair word to use, but the spotlight's often on whatever fella is sitting next to her. But Susanna is a brilliant journalist who really does cut to the heart of these issues, and I saw her holding Stephen Barclay to account in a way that I don't know whether it happened in any other studios, but that's the only one I've seen. And the claim that I don't... Do you apologise for the deaths? And the response, as far as I could tell from the clip I saw, was I don't accept that we locked down too late. What would you say to someone like Richard? I think Susanna asked. What would you say to someone who's lost a loved one? And his answer was, well, I don't accept that we locked down too late. That's incredible, right? But how enthusiastically can you go after a monkey like that when the organ grinder wrote the book on evading and denying responsibility? 28 minutes after 10 is the time. Mick's in Chelmsford. Nick, what would you like to say?
James, good morning.
Hello.
I love you to bits. I think what you do is fantastic.
Don't waste the time. You've only got a minute.
But I want you to cast the net further afield.
Okay.
Where were our glorious opposition over that time?
They weren't allowed in to SAGE meetings, were they?
But they didn't hold anyone to account.
Well, how can they if they don't know what the science is that the government is acting on? You have to be in the room where it happens, Mick.
If we sneered at America for those two men being the only two people that could run America, how come 630 people in the Houses of Parliament, not just the government but the Houses of Parliament, how come we couldn't get Yvette Cooper or somebody to stand up and ask the right questions and say, what are you doing? This is wrong.
They weren't in the room where it happens. I mean, that might be true subsequently, but we're talking about the earliest, the gap between January and May, effectively, and they weren't allowed in the room. You remember Sadiq Khan sitting in this studio, and we genuinely didn't believe him. Well, I believed him because he was telling the truth, but I couldn't believe my ears when he talked about how little contact he'd had with central government.
But
how can you hold people to account if they're not telling you what they're doing or why they're doing it or the decisions that they're making? Dominic Cummings was in the room where it happens, and he's probably the harshest critic of what was happening to emerge from the whole sorry mess. And that's only because he got handed his backside on a plate by Boris Johnson after falling out with his current wife.
But they could have done that through you instead of sitting on their thumbs.
Done it through
and
me.
playing the party line.
I love you too, mate, but I'm not that important.
You are.
I'm really not. If I was, there'd be no bloody Brexit, would there?
It's important that the press hold people to account.
Well, yeah.
And when someone says, this is a national emergency, should we have had a government of national emergency and got rid of these clowns and put people in who are then saying, this is what we're going to do?
They've got an 80-seat majority, Michael.
The test and trace system is nothing but a farce.
Got an 80-seat majority. And forelock tugging is now our new national sport. No one could have touched them. And no one can touch them now. Why do you think there's not going to be any consequences now? Forget about last year. Forget about last May. It's October 2021. It's an utterly damning report. And he's on holiday.
What this report is doing is it's soft-soaping us for next year for a proper inquiry to say, we've covered all these questions. We covered all that back in October last year.
Finally, we agree. Finally, we can agree on something. That takes us neatly up to the news. I don't know about the detail of what he alleges, but the idea that we'll all be moving along now, nothing to see here. Thank you very much. And he's right about opposition, although he's picking the wrong bit of opposition. If the lies that were told in 2016 and then again in 2019 were not properly opposed by Her Majesty's official opposition, the question of what they would move on to next has now been answered. And it involves 130,000 deaths. We will never know how many of the 137,763 people reported, the COVID reported deaths, could have been avoided by more clarity and leadership from government. But we now know, I think incontrovertibly, that that some, if not many of them, could have been avoided by better leadership, better clarity and leadership. This is one of the conclusions it's impossible not to draw from a joint report between two select committees chaired by former Conservative ministers. The key areas obviously include the lateness of lockdown, which sounds like it was a sort of dither and delay scenario. The poor preparedness for it. We thought somewhat complacently we well prepared. We were the second best prepared nation in the world, according to some measures, official measures. But that was, we learn, in the event of a flu-type outbreak rather than a SARS-type outbreak. And across the 151 pages, we also see the British exceptionalism that sort of thought that, as with callers I used to take, who would say, well, this might sound all very complicated and difficult in the context of international trade and Ireland, but our bulldog spirit will see us through. So British exceptionalism played a part in the government's thinking, if that's not a slightly complicated term to use in the context, that they would somehow be able to weather the storm. Remember when David Cameron said that Boris Johnson would be able to beat coronavirus because he'd seen him play tennis? He knew that, this isn't a joke, he knew that Boris Johnson would beat coronavirus. Obviously, this was before he was intubated and hospitalised and nearly died. I've seen him play tennis. That attitude, which is bred, almost injected into the bloodstream at schools like the one I went to in that era, and schools like the one both Cameron and Johnson went to, they thought they'd be able to sort of style it out. They said, well, no, bulldog spirit. So that has caused thousands of deaths as well. The appalling test and trace thing. I mean, where's that woman gone? Dido Harding. Where's she gone? Remember at the end of Call of Duty, that brilliant speech about failing upwards. Now, it's pretty obvious what he was talking about, old Jed Mercurio, wasn't it? So where's she? Well, how bad would you have to perform at work? Was it £37 billion? God knows how many thousands of deaths that could have been avoided if a better test and trace system. If a better test and trace system had been in place from the start, we wouldn't have had to have a lockdown at all. But no one's to blame. In Brexit Britain, nobody is to blame. 03456060973. If you lost someone, how do you process the fact? There's nothing to apologise for, according to the government. Nobody to blame, according to their supporters. And I every day find myself on the big stuff, coming back to this particular problem. I can talk about you, but I want to talk to you. You're still on side. You still think, he's all right. He's doing his best. 137,763 dead people, and a report by two former Conservative ministers laying much of the responsibility squarely at the feet of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and their advisors. He's all right. How does that work? How can you sit there now not wanting consequences, punishments, whether it's Dido Harding or whether it's Boris Johnson or whether it's Matt Hancock. How can that be? How bad would you have to be at work before you got punished? How did this lot get away with it? What have we done? I don't think it was always like this. Maybe I'm naive, a little bit politically myopic, perhaps, but I don't think it was like this. I really don't. Amber Rudd resigned on a point of principle over, really, being badly advised by civil servants and inheriting an almighty mess from Theresa May. Amber Rudd did the decent thing. That wasn't that long ago. Same party of government, many of the same people in top positions. But this? Nobody is responsible for this. Nobody is apologising for this. Nobody is accounting for it. That's shocking. But what's even more shocking, and I'm sorry if you feel a bit badgered, but if I'm now describing you, what's even more shocking is that you're okay with it. What's going to be next? 10:40 is the time. The phone lines are open, 03456060973. It's already been condemned in some way as fatalistic. Hannah Brady of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group said the report found the deaths of 150,000 people were redeemed by the success of the vaccine rollout. Because the second part of the report is, oh yes, the vaccines went really well. She adds the report is laughable and more interested in political arguments about whether you can bring laptops to Cobra meetings than it is in the experiences of those who tragically lost parents, partners or children to COVID-19. This is an attempt to ignore and gaslight bereaved families who will see it as a slap in the face. I don't believe any of them were spoken to by the two committees involved, but I also don't believe in an examination of the political decision-making that would actually have been necessary. But you have to hope a proper public inquiry at some point in the not-too-distant future takes their experiences and feelings into account. 10:41 is the time. Julia is in Middlesbrough. Julia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'd just like to point out, I think Boris Johnson's gone on holiday on purpose at the minute. So all of this report comes out. He's away, so he can't answer for anything. He just leaves his minions to deal with it.
We need to check with Theo on whether or not this would have been in the diary. It seems a little bit convenient, doesn't it? Not to mention coincident.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm in Marbella. I'm terribly sorry. I'm on the phone to Narendra Modi. I won't be able to respond to a damning report into my own government.
Exactly, and he's away, and by the time he gets back, all the heat will have died down. And there'll be something else up in the news. So they'll get away with it again. To me, I'm a nurse and I work in the care homes, okay?
Oh, wow.
If I went into a care home and reviewed somebody's medication and didn't spot the signs that maybe they were having side effects and left them, and that person then went and had a stroke, I would be hauled over the coals by the NMC. I'd be up in front of the NMC, and that's for one person, not 130,000.
39,000 care home residents died with coronavirus between the 10th of April 2020 and the end of March this year.
That's right, and most of them, where I work, I've lost at least 15, 20 off my caseload alone.
I'm sorry.
And I mean, I knew these people. I knew them really well, and I have to, go out and see other people where I know they were, and I know they died of COVID, and I know that what other families have gone through, and it's absolutely horrendous.
What would you want to see, though? And this is, I'm sure you'll give me the benefit of the doubt, Julia, when I tell you this is by no means a defence of anybody or anything that's happened. But if they apologise, they're admitting responsibility. And if they admit responsibility, they can't really stay in their jobs, can they? So, I mean, there's a sort of circle of self-protection.
Exactly. What I'd like to see is a good opposition. I mean, look at Keir Starmer's lovely, don't get me wrong, he's a lovely bloke, but he's not the right man to be in charge of the Labour Party at the minute. I know they've got all the seats in Parliament, the Tories, and nobody can really do anything.
But you can land punches, can't you? Even if you can't knock anybody out, you can bruise them. You can make the public see things as clearly as somebody like you can see them, but Keir Starmer fails to communicate that.
It's just so bad, the opposition. Angela Rayner, till she said scum, till she went and called them scum, I used to hold her really highly in regard. And she called them out and she pulled them out a few times and continues to do so. But she's spoiled herself now.
Do you feel that? For you personally, or just because of how that gets played out in places that are a little bit frightened of Angela Rayner?
I just think it just shouldn't have said that. It's like, Howie, scum. Yes, there might be scum, but you don't go out and say that the way that you did.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because tank top bum boys is fine.
Yeah, but
it's a funny old world. I'm just pointing that out. I mean, I'm not endorsing either view, but it's.
Oh no. I know what you mean, but she would have been good, and she did call them out, and there were so many things people were saying to them, and then all they keep doing is going back to we took the advice off the science, and look how good we are doing all these vaccinations.
Well, that's the other point. The constant claims at the time that we were world beating, that we were doing brilliantly, and I mean it is surreal right now. I don't think I'm not going to ask your age, Julia. That would be very ungallant of me. But I'm fair. I do this for a living, so I watch things quite closely. But sometimes your nose is so close to the screen that you only see the pixels. You don't see the proper pictures. It never used to be like this. You wouldn't have had a catastrophe. Lord Carrington resigned because he didn't foresee the Argentinians invading the Falkland Islands. You know, Amber Rudd resigned because she'd been misinformed about Windrush and ended up saying things in the House of Commons that weren't true. This is unbelievable. This is sort of Banana Republic territory.
It is, and she was right about that when she said Banana Republic, absolutely. But she shouldn't have called them scum.
It's funny what's popping up today. Have a listen to my Full Disclosure podcast with her and see if it can restore some of your faith in Angela Rayner, Julia, all right?
Oh, I will. Thank you.
You can find it on the Global Player or on the LBC website. It's about 3 weeks ago. Oddly, I said on air, I'm very, very impressed by her as a person, as a human and as a politician. But I do wonder whether her unguardedness could be both a negative and a positive. And in the context of that interview, it was 100% positive. So refreshing to hear a politician not mind their P's and Q's and be more worried about causing a problem or causing offence than they were about getting the truth across. And then a couple of days later, I'd almost like the clock had been set. The fear that the unguardedness could be electorally problematic came to fruition, and for Julia there it was indeed problematic. 10:46 is the time already. I suspect we'll stay with this for a while longer. If you have a proper crack at the question of how this has happened, but particularly if you sort of sing from a slightly different or very different hymn sheet from the one I sing from politically, how have we ended up in a place where two former Conservative ministers can publish a patchy but clearly critical report attributing deaths to the Conservative government, and everybody in the country knows, regardless of how you vote or whether you vote, that nobody's going to face consequences for this. As Julia said, if she went into a care home tomorrow and made a mistake, she'd not only be facing problems about hanging on to a job, she could well be facing criminal charges. And yet in Brexit Britain, 137,763 people can die. An inquiry led by two Conservative ministers can find catastrophic failure of leadership by a Conservative government. And you have to turn on LBC at 10 o'clock to hear anybody suggesting that probably some people should be facing consequences and punishment for this. Oh, and you've got a government minister touring all the studios saying, no, I'm Shaggy. It wasn't me. A text here. James, do you happen to know if Boris Johnson will be back for PMQs tomorrow? Well, I do, actually, and no, he won't. Not as things stand. Parliament's in recess being the reason for that. So I think if I was Prime Minister and I'd been in charge and this report had come out, I'd come back from my holiday, I think, and do a couple of interviews. But I'm not Prime Minister, and it is highly unlikely that I ever will be. I came back from my holiday over the Barnard Castle thing, actually, because I just thought, well, partly because I thought I have to get my teeth into this, but also partly because perhaps to stray into an endorsement of Mick and Chelmsford's very kind comment half an hour or so ago. I am sort of conscious of some of you relying upon me to see whether, I don't know, the direction of traffic. Sometimes you can sit there and think, well, maybe I'm the one that's got everything wrong. And then you accrue all the evidence and you think, no, it's definitely not me. Here we are looking at a report by two former Conservative ministers roundly condemning a Conservative government for its failure, let's just pick on one thing, to lock down soon enough. And you know and I know, no one will get punished for it. And I can't understand that. If you can give me an explanation, like really, I mean, I've got my own explanations, obviously, but they touch the sides, to coin a phrase, but they don't fill the void. You know, if you were writing a book, your editor would send it back, so that's not enough. Or an essay, if you're writing an essay at school. Explain why when here you go, this is quite clever. Explain why when the joint report into the coronavirus catastrophe was published and found the government's failure to be one of the worst in history, I would suggest possibly the worst in history, why were no politicians punished? And you have to write that. There you go. Okay, I'll be teacher. Write that answer now, and then I've done mine. I might expand upon them shortly, but you've heard plenty from me already this hour. And then I'm the teacher, and I get that's good, but it's a B. What will get an A? Here is a report published by 2 former Conservative ministers, absolutely coating the Conservative government in responsibility for God knows how many tens of thousands of deaths, due to failure, an absence of clarity and an absence of leadership. And don't give me any 2020 hindsight on this. If you were listening to this programme and many others in March of 2020, you'd have been hearing calls for the lockdown. And every hour mattered, not just every day, every hour mattered. People like John Ashton up in Liverpool, people like Rory Stewart, people like Devi Sridhar. So now the report has been published. Why was the gob on a stick on LBC, James O'Brien, so confident that no politicians would be punished? Or what created an environment in which you and I could be so confident that no one would be punished? No one will face consequences for this. Right, I want your essays, and I want them by 11:30 today. Louise is in Fulham. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. Well, I don't want to give you an essay, but I think the answer is because the way the UK Constitution works is that politicians aren't punished other than in elections when they're actually in power and serving their term. They're meant to punish themselves. I know that sounds really weird, but we have a concept that's gone back for hundreds of years of prime ministerial and ministerial...
Theresa May sacked Priti Patel.
Yeah, that's true. But generally, we still have a concept that when you've done something wrong, really wrong, morally wrong, or just plain negligent, like this report, you're meant to quit. And I think what happened is that David Cameron, he quit for campaigning for Remain and then losing the referendum. And that's where the concept of ministerial responsibility ended. Yes, there are a few exceptions to the rules, but
no, you can't. No, I'm not going to fall out. But I mean, you can't have exceptions to the rules in a thesis like yours. I mean, the fact that Amber Rudd resigned on a point of principle and Theresa May sacked Priti Patel means that the change, whatever the change may be, started in December 2019, not in June 2016.
No, I really disagree with that.
But I've just given you examples.
Yeah, no, I know you have, but there are so many more where the Prime Minister or ministers have done something where people would normally have expected them to resign and where they haven't. Think about Theresa May. All right, think about Theresa May losing her Brexit votes repeatedly and not resigning until really the last minute.
Well, she resigned when she... No, that's not a point of principle, though.
Oh, it is a constitutional convention that if you lose massive votes that are really important, you resign as Prime Minister.
Not in the context of Brexit, Louise.
Well, it was a massive vote. I would argue that, yes, a lot of people thought she would.
I mean, listen, I don't know. I don't want to start pulling my A-level out, not least because it's 30 years old. But that only applies to a vote of no confidence. If someone had brought a vote of no confidence after she lost the Brexit vote, then your constitutional point would stand. But with greatest of respect, it just doesn't.
No, it applies to really key votes.
It doesn't. It's a vote of no confidence is the only thing that gets rid of a Prime Minister.
Well, James, I still think that a lot of people
don't expect anyone... You can't just keep saying it. I mean, it doesn't become truth via repetition. You're as bad as Boris Johnson. So what changed in December 2019? Even under Theresa May, you could get fired for dishonesty and disreputable behaviour like Priti Patel did, or you could fall on your sword, whether you were pushed or fell over misleading the House of Commons like Amber Rudd did. That would not happen now. Take Priti Patel as an example, okay? An independent inquiry into allegations of bullying found that she was a bully, and she didn't resign, she didn't get fired. The bloke that conducted the report walked the plank in protest. Rewind 2 years, possibly even less, when she lied to Theresa May, that was it. She was fired while she was flying back to the UK. There's the change right there. It's got nothing to do with the Constitution, everything to do with personnel.
Well, look... Maybe it's the personnel that makes a difference. But, I mean, you mentioned Barnard Castle, Dominic Cunningham's key advisor.
Yep, post-December 2019.
the point I'm trying... Okay. So even if you take that it's just under the Boris Johnson government, there is a concept in the UK now that people don't expect people to resign when they've done something really bad.
Absolutely right. And it began with this Prime Minister. So even before December 2019, well, we've proved that, despite your best efforts at misrepresenting the Constitution and pretending not to remember Amber Rudd and Priti Patel.
Well, Theresa May, come on, when she tried to bypass Parliament...
No, votes of no confidence.
She couldn't.
Votes of no confidence. Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament.
Yeah, and he didn't resign.
Anything you can do, I can do better. Anything you can cite, I can cite higher. All right, and it all goes back to this current Prime Minister. So finally, this is your chance to rescue your grade, Louise.
Go on.
What's changed? Why has there been this epic decline dating back to Boris Johnson succeeding Theresa May?
Well, I think it's what I've said, that in most cases, even if you want to say from this government onwards...
You have to, because those are the facts.
People haven't resigned from what people would expect them to resign from.
Why not?
Because they know they can get away with not doing that.
How come, if they couldn't do it before? What's changed? I'm not badgering you. I'm just conscious of the time.
No. It's a really good question. I think probably that they've got a Prime Minister who will support them getting away with stuff they wouldn't have got away with before. So if they've got the confidence of the Prime Minister not to resign, and frankly, the country... the Prime Minister feels he has, with an 8-seat majority, the confidence of the country not to resign, right or wrong, then they're just not going to. Basically, they can get away with it.
They're laughing in our faces.
We're not going to hold them to account.
And actually, if we had to pick a milestone, probably not necessarily the accession of Boris Johnson or the victory in December 2019. I think we might both be able to agree that Barnard Castle broke something.
Yeah, I think in the kind of UK psychology, it definitely did. I mean, the Priti Patel thing didn't help either.
I was testing my eyesight, Louise. I was testing my eyesight.
Yeah, well, I think people have given up now.
That was the moment. Perhaps let's ask people what their moment was. I think you might be right. Except they haven't given up politics, oddly, because the people with their eyes most tightly shut are the people who are waving their flags and tugging their forelocks the hardest. And that's my area now of complete fascination. I wish Louise was right. I wish this was about ambivalence and lethargy. But it's not. It's about people who 18 months ago were saying, he was doing his best. He was doing his best. He was doing his best. Give him a break. He was doing his best. Fast forward 18 months. We don't need to talk about that anymore. Let's not talk about that. Or where was Keir Starmer? I know some people on the left are saying that as well. But if you were a supporter of Boris Johnson, the idea that responsibility for his mess lies with anybody but Boris Johnson, well, didn't his own girlfriend say that when that row was recorded? The idea that he'd never taken responsibility for anything in his life. So don't take my word for it. The thing I just said about hindsight and the some criticisms of this report today, that it sort of... Oh, well, who could have known at the time? We knew at the time. This is the Times in April of 2020. There's no way you're at war if your PM isn't there, an advisor told the Times. And what you learn about Boris was he didn't chair any meetings. He liked his country breaks. He didn't work weekends. It was like working for an old-fashioned chief executive in a local authority 20 years ago. There was a real sense that he didn't do urgent crisis planning. It was exactly like people feared he would be. And, of course, the failure to attend Cobra meetings. Do you remember that when we spoke about that? He didn't go to the first 5 Cobra meetings. It's incredible, right? So your challenge this hour, and we'll stay with it for as long as I remain interested, is this. We have a country, we have created, I believe, in the last 2 years. You can challenge that, although you'll have to have better foundations for challenging that suggestion than Louise. I mean, she was on the right track. That sort of constitution. I'm sounding very patronising now. I apologise, but you can't claim that things have been like this for ages when you have relatively recent examples of ministers both being sacked, Priti Patel, and resigning, Amber Rudd, post 2016. So what you have to do now is explain to the class why no politician is going to face consequences or punishment for this. Okay, if you're just joining us, you'd be unsurprised to learn it's the joint report into the early coronavirus responses, which caused deaths. No one's disputing that. The only question is how many. It was awful. So much of avoidable error, so much absence of clarity in leadership, whether it's Boris Johnson not being at Cobra meetings or whether it is the absolute failure to bring in lockdowns or to get on top of test and trace. Right? Why will, in the United Kingdom in 2021, why will no politician face punishment for these, I don't want to say crimes, but I wonder if there is a case for using that word, for these problems. Sounds too mild. What word do we use? Catastrophe. Why will no politician face punishment for these failures? I may grade you. I may decide in the process of grading you that that's quite an inappropriate response to such a serious conversation. Only time will tell. It's 11:06. Steve's in Ipswich. Steve, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello, James. I can see obviously that the government issues have caused deaths, and obviously they weren't prepared, and in a lot of cases they didn't have anything set up to do it. They didn't have trust and safe. They didn't have set up on vaccines and things like that.
No, we did really well on vaccines, so I'm arguing with everyone today. So that one doesn't stand.
We didn't have a way of manufacturing. Then we had to make manufacturing plants. We don't
need to put that on the list. That's not actually true. If you listen to my podcast with Dr. Sarah Gilbert, Professor Sarah Gilbert, and Dr. Catherine Green, we were incredibly well, largely or partly because of European Union funding and various other issues and foreign aid. But never mind that. Leave the vaccines out of it. That went well. All right.
But the main point why they're not going to be punished over it.
Why not?
Is because of guilt. It's our guilt. It's the elephant in the room. It's the thing that nobody says, that we are the people that killed other people. We're the people that didn't do as we were told. If we did as we were told, even if it was a week later, then those people wouldn't die.
I'm going to disagree with you. I just want to check that whether you have any personal. I don't want to sort of be too robust with you if you lost someone yourself.
No, I know.
But we were really good, mate. There were a few idiots around. There were a few idiots around. But we were really good. It is true.
It's not true. It isn't true.
Steve, it just is.
Everybody who lives down the street can see somebody who has not done as they were meant to be, who's had a party, who has done this. No. And nobody said it. They did.
They were scandalous stories. I can even almost remember the street of the place in Kensington that had a party. It was national news, Steve.
But you're talking one individual. You just have to look in your own area.
No, you're not right. No. The general public were largely brilliant on this.
No, they haven't been largely brilliant. They've been mostly brilliant, but they've been. Well,
then why wouldn't they be mostly calling for punishments then?
It's because of the guilt.
But why would they be guilty if they've done nothing wrong?
But everybody says, "Oh well, I did go out then, or I went there,
they don't.
I did this."
No, they don't.
I don't believe.
Look, there was fatigue, but between March and May of 2020, what you described simply isn't accurate.
I don't. In my job, I listen to people that have. I won't go into it, but who have gone into care homes, who are ill or what have you. Okay, and as it was happening, the people that were phoning up and saying they're ill and had been in work and been ill, there are just so many. It was
no, it isn't. I mean, it just
things.
Well, we're not going to reach a consensus on this. But I look back to the early days of the lockdown, the early months of the lockdown when it finally happened, and I see millions upon millions of people enduring privation, enduring absences, not seeing family members for months, if not more. Over a year, children not going to school, parents struggling with home working, and the idea that they're all sitting there now feeling guilty, which is why they're not calling for politicians to be punished. It is, I'm afraid, my friend, that's just nonsense. I'm sorry, but it is, and it's also quite offensive. I know you didn't intend it to be, and I'm sorry that you have some colleagues that you don't get on very well with, or a couple of neighbours that you don't like, but it's offensive on quite a grand scale to suggest that the reason why people aren't calling for heads to roll from government is because they know that they bear responsibility for some of these deaths themselves. You can only go with the guidance that you're given, and the massive majority of the public did. It's only relatively recently that the complete headbangers have started coming out with all their the anti-vax thing didn't start until the vaccine started, did it? So the absolute madness, the real headbangers, some people were calling it a hoax, weren't they? Some people were behaving very oddly. But no, Steve, sorry, mate. We're not going to fall out, but that's just not on. Especially not for, people listening who did lose loved ones, hearing you suggest that the reason why no one's calling for politicians to be punished, or the reason why we live in a society where we all know politicians won't be punished, is because we're all feeling guilty ourselves. Daryl's in Hickling in Leicestershire. Daryl, what would you like to say?
Oh, James.
Daryl.
I've been wanting
So
to
much
talk
to say,
you
so
for
little
long.
time. Go on, fill your boots. Well, fill your boots for 3.5 minutes maximum.
I could actually talk to you for 3 weeks. It's surreal, really, because it's as though you're talking and it's coming out of my mind.
Gosh.
Everything that you say is what I've been thinking.
Crikey.
And, you're talking about this to the lady about the turning point.
Mm.
When did the Conservatives not become the Conservatives? When have we got this? Can't really call it a Conservative party anymore, can we?
I don't know.
I'm a Conservative voter.
Yeah.
But I'm not really a Conservative, if you see what I mean. I'm like you. You remember when you said that you voted for Boris Johnson?
Yes.
I'm the same.
You just fell for you fell for the comedy act and I don't know that that's excusable.
Well, not really. Not like
no,
you,
well,
James.
just
not like you, James.
No, in 2008, I wasn't paying attention. That's I'm afraid. So I don't know whether or not that's an excuse in 2019.
Yeah, no, it's slightly different circumstances because I'm in a constituency that was Ken Clarke.
Okay.
In 2017, I think was the election, was it? I thought, he's a European. I'm a European.
Right.
I was very, very, very Remain. And so I thought, well, I'll vote for Ken Clarke, but I'm not a Conservative.
But you've been abandoned. You're the people that never get spoken about, aren't you? Because the Conservative Party has been completely Brexified. And yet...
Well, let me say, I'm a Dominic Grieve. I'm a Ken Clarke.
Yes.
I'm the Gawk Squad.
Yes.
I'm a Rory Stewart.
Yes. Who speaks for you today?
Who speaks for me? Who speaks for me? That I'm tweetering on Liberal Democrat, but I'm an absolute European.
And that's because the B word runs through
James,
British politics like a stick of rock. I can tell you do. Just in a sentence.
I get quite anxious and very upset. Now, the lady that just rang you up, Louise, was talking about, and you were trying to explain to her, when did they change?
Yeah.
And she's trying to convince you that actually this is the norm. And I can assure you this is not the norm. This changed at Barnard Castle. Yeah. For me, if you were asking for me for when did it change, being one of the Gawk Squad, if you like, a Ken Clarkist, it changed when Boris Johnson, before the election, refused to let I can't think of his name, Dominic Grieve, released the report on Russia.
Yeah.
Now,
and that goes back to the B word as well, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And if Dominic Grieve was allowed to have leaked that report, if he was a dishonourable man and came down to the same levels as Boris Johnson and leaked that report, we wouldn't have been in the state we're in now, would we?
I think you're a bit more optimistic than I am, actually. I don't know by then whether it would have made any difference at all.
Well, it might, it might not. But with regards to the people who are like me...
Yes.
Right? I go back to somebody that's quite good at cooking. Her name's Delia Smith.
Yeah, go on.
She went out onto the Carrow Road pitch and she shouted, "Where are you? Where are all these people? Where are the likes of me? A second to death of this. Because this is a dangerous government. This is a divisive government. This is a Brexit government. And Brexit has broken the back of our society. There's no more Conservative, Liberal, Democrat, Labour anymore. It's Brexit that's destroyed this country. It's turned family against family. You talk about it in the street. You talk about it in the pub. But the only problem is that I take a huge interest in politics. But I dare tell you that 70% of those people that went and voted in the referendum knew nothing about politics. And when you ask them about voting for Brexit, I don't want to know. I don't want to talk about it.
Well, I think we probably have similar experiences in that field. Briefly, and I can see what you mean about having a lot to get off your chest, Darren. I'm very honoured that you chose me to listen. But on this question of punishment, in a couple of sentences, if you can, how can you and I, and maybe some people listening don't like what we the views we share. We obviously don't share all views, but how can we be so confident that no one's going to get punished for this? What has caused that specific breakdown rather than the broader malaise? The knowledge that this report will point a very, very powerful finger of blame towards the very top of government, and no one will face consequences.
James, I feel a little bit guilty actually ringing you, because I would sooner leave the airwaves open for somebody that's lost someone to this pandemic.
Okay.
If I'd have lost anybody to this pandemic, having known how this government and Boris Johnson has dealt with it, and all the things that you talk about not going to meetings, etc., I would be devastated. And I suggest that maybe the bereaved families, the organisation of the bereaved families, ask the people of the country, give us some money. Let's bring these people to actually,
some semblance of justice. Daryl, I'm late.
Some semblance of
justice.
Of justice. And like I say, I could talk to you for 3 weeks.
Well, I'll tell you what. You can ring me again.
Right.
You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Are you sure?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't say sorry. That's what this show is for. It's why I come to work every day to listen to.
Let me just finish on one last thing, James.
If you would, Keith's getting very itchy. It's very late for the break now, but you can.
Right, okay.
Occasion. Go on.
You are my oasis of truth.
Crikey.
In a world of lies.
Well, that's quite moving, actually, Daryl. All right, shall we hug it out?
Yeah, hug it out, mate.
Let's hug it out, Daryl.
I'll talk to you again, mate.
Bloody better. All right.
All the best.
Make that a promise. You mind how you go. Thank you, Daryl. An awful lot of admiration and even perhaps love coming in for the last caller, Daryl. It gives me at least some hope for this country. Writes Adrian, I'm completely on your wavelength and I want to pass on my thanks. Daryl was worth being late for the break. Not from Keith, from Deborah. I hope he contributes again. Some nice comments about me as well. Thank you for that, but I won't read those out. I have a tear in my eye listening to Daryl. He represents a voice that has become a silent whisper in all of the noise. We have completely lost our moral compass. I could actually go on for 3 weeks, as Daryl suggested he could have done as well, but I won't. I'm welling up listening to that last caller. He speaks for me. Please never stop telling the truth on LBC. And so it goes on. That's you can tell sometimes when people's dams have broken, can't you? And that idea that no one's listening. Obviously, I don't suffer from that last bit of the condition that we're describing, but some days I do. I flirt with it. No one's listening. How can we be in a country where he didn't even go to Cobra meetings? His own most senior advisor says he's in the room but not in the room. And now we're looking at a report by two Conservative ministers, former Conservative ministers, about why it all went so appallingly wrong while he was standing up in the House of Commons calling Keir Starmer names and claiming it was all going brilliantly. It's just not right. It's not normal. And yet, that's what gaslighting means. Do you know where gaslight comes from? It's fairly obvious, but it is, I think it was a play originally. And the husband is trying to make his wife think that she's going mad. So he just turns the light down incrementally. And she says, is it getting dark in here? And he says, no, darling, it's not at all. He's trying to make her go mad or think that she has gone mad. That's where the phrase comes from. It's pretty literal. And in a way, when you think about the culmination, like you think back to that and that, so the Russia report, the bullying report, Barnard Castle, the proroguing of Parliament, and then there's stuff that wasn't planned in advance, like Jacob Rees-Mogg accusing the people who died in Grenfell Tower of lacking common sense. All of the egregious conduct, both deliberate and, in Rees-Mogg's case, just inevitable, a consequence of his character rather than any master plan. There's just so much of it eventually that you can't pick on any of it. And then something huge drives into the room. A report by two select committees, pretty much in a House of Commons with an 80-seat majority for the government. The select committees become the only real means of scrutiny. It's why chairing them is so important. And on this occasion, two, both chaired by former Conservative ministers, going about as far as you could realistically expect them to go. And I don't know whether this describes Greg Clark and Jeremy Hunt, but secure in the knowledge that no one will be punished. And that's the bit I don't get and possibly never will, although I'll never stop asking. 11:24 is the time. Simon is in Romford. Simon, what would you like to say?
Well, I've got quite a few things, James. I have to say that was a really lovely thing which you'll ask for, Oasis of Truth.
Oh, stop it. No, seriously.
That was beautiful. No, seriously. So, okay, where to begin? So we lost our dad to COVID, and he died early April 2020, and he fell ill on, I think, the 25th of March, so 2 days after the lockdown was announced. Now, that dithering, that and I saw Dominic Cummings' tweets, and there was this picture of a notice board. These people, where do we? There's a social contract here where it's gone on for hundreds of years. I'm trying to make sense of it. Was it Thomas Hobbes who wrote that book?
The social contract was by Rousseau.
Okay, there we go. It's this we give the power to these people. So, like you say, we are kind of complicit in. We've just got these idiots now, and maybe it is that thing with where he went to that castle in Durham, Barnard Castle. Possibly that was a seismic moment. I'm not sure. Yeah, but those few weeks made a massive difference. My dad got COVID from my stepmom. It was, and she was not isolating. Everyone was very compliant after that. So who knows? Maybe he was one of the thousands that could have stayed alive. We don't know. He was 81. He led a full life. I feel a lot of emotions today, but I don't necessarily feel in any way that people are going to be held to account because we know they're not going to. The paradox in all this is I got a message to my dad when he was on his last legs and he was trying to, keep on going. By the way, the Prime Minister's in hospital too. So you're both going through this together. That bulldog British spirit, knowing that the Prime Minister was going through it too, maybe that prolonged my dad's life. Yeah. Knew when he was ending, and the nurse said, look, his brain's saying he wants to keep on going. His body will say enough's enough in a few days. That day was unfortunately on my brother's birthday, the 9th of April last year. So we will all the people who've gone through this complex grieving process, we're not going to get any apology. Of course we're not, because if there's an element of guilt there or to blame, that it comes back to that social contract that we give these people the power. Now, I've never voted Conservative in my life. I understand why people do. Sure. Absolutely. And my dad was a staunch Liberal Democrat. He was, he used to pick parliamentary candidates. He was reasonably high up at one moment in time. He would have never voted for Boris Johnson, but he understood why people did. And, you look at Angela Merkel, for instance, whenever her premiership comes to an end, there's been times where as a head of state, she has admitted responsibility for her maybe political mistakes and being held accountable. I think she did in COVID. I could be wrong, but I think she said quite early doors. She said, we've got this wrong and we're changing it now. Or the immigration stuff, whatever it is, we put human beings in charge of us, and they're going to make mistakes, on a collective institution level and individually as well. As long as people take responsibility, there was a global pandemic. Every government was winging it. Everyone was scratching their heads thinking, what the hell are we going to do here? There was room for error. There was room for forgivable error. Wasn't there? That's what you're saying, and I completely agree with you. But the problem is, avoidable errors while claiming that you're doing brilliantly is a completely different proposition. And that's where we were, and it's where we still are. So when you say, and I like your generosity of spirit, it's an example to us all, especially given what you've been through. But when you say that we know that there'll be no consequences, you say it quite fluently. Not glibly, but very fluently. It's a given. It's not even a line of debate. Where does that come from? Where does that? What's the seed that's already sprouted, Simon? Because I'm the same. I'm not sitting here saying, do you think they'll face any consequences? I'm sitting here saying they won't. No chance at all. Absolutely not. Not the snowball's chance in hell that they're going to face any consequences or punishment whatsoever. What's the root of that? For you? I think, for me, it comes before Barnard Castle. Yeah. It came for the first time so people didn't really understand what governments did until they were forcibly locked down, and there'd be consequences afterwards. I know there was some anomalies, like one of your previous colleagues pointed out, but I genuinely think that was when people realised what this social contract was about. Yeah. And these people will be able to tell us what to do because we've given them a mandate to. Yes. And I think that's what changed for me. That's when these people can say, no, we'll tell you what to do because we believe it's the right thing. And if it turns out there's mistakes down the line about the way we acted at that point in time, well, we're not going to apologise because part of this contract, you've given us that mandate. So, look, I mean, there's governments all over the world who've, turned their guns and tanks and biological weapons on their people. So, this is about culpability, and we can never prove how many deaths how many people's lives could have been saved. We can't do that. It's a bit of a different situation. So I just, I look, and it does come back to that, and you've talked about it really eloquently as well around how, in these kind of private schools and what they feed into people subliminally and how that over sense of confidence. So we'll be able to get through this. I'll be able to wing anything.
Yes.
This man, Boris Johnson, our head of state, just reeks of this.
Yes, and he still does. That's that. I mean, there were talk, wasn't there, early on about how it would have changed him. Being so poorly would have changed him, and I found it very unlikely then, and I think it's been proven impossible now. Simon, thank you. I'm sorry for your loss. I meant what I said. It was an inspirational generosity of spirit that you found there in analysing some of the stuff, possibly being more generous than I am to some of the politicians involved, and you're the one that lost a loved one. So thank you for that. If you were in charge of a government that was being criticised by former ministers in the same party of appalling leadership, would you go on holiday to Marbella or Marbella? What's in a name? Colin's in Forest Hill. Colin, back to the very, very serious conversation about the relationship between government, the people, and now, I think, consequences. What would you like to say?
My son, good morning, James,
hello,
by the way.
Hello,
my son passed away from COVID 2020, the 5th of April. And on the 23rd of March, I think that's when Boris first did the lockdown. So I don't know if you can pinpoint any one person. You can say the government, which, the problem is that you've got medical people as well involved in this.
Yes, you do.
So, we did not bury his ashes until the 1st of October this year. Because he was cremated soon after he passed away. But he, as I say, that was the 1st of October, and that was his birthday. But it was because of the amount of people that wanted to go to the memorial that we waited so long, his wife waited so long, and, to do it. But I did think afterwards, the months afterwards, that maybe had Boris or whoever did the lockdown about 5, maybe 6 weeks or maybe a month or so before he did, we may have saved a few people, and my son might have still been here.
It's a horrible, very difficult thought, isn't it? Because we'll never know. And of course, when you come down to it, Colin, I think hours mattered, really. We realise now, a day earlier or half a day earlier, and somebody who ended up getting infected and then ended up being hospitalised would not have got infected in the first place.
No.
It was the 23rd of March that he announced the lockdown. 4 days before that, he said the UK can turn the tide of the disease in 12 weeks and send coronavirus packing.
Yeah.
We then had the pictures we couldn't believe here was the people coming back, the people crowding into airports to come back as the lockdowns began to be announced. That happened on the 23rd of March. And another one that I think, it was the 18th of March when he announced school closures, but it was the 25th of February. You mentioned the scientists, and they have questions to answer as well, certainly, but they can only ever advise. It was the 25th of February that Sage advised social distancing and school closures could cut transmission by 50 to 60%. And then, I don't know about you, but do you remember the handshaking business? Sage had literally said, don't go around shaking hands and hugging people. And he said he started boasting about shaking hands with everybody.
Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know with my son, and I wouldn't mention the company he worked for, but they did shut down on the 23rd, but obviously he'd already contacted it
Yes.
Through the job that he did. And anyway, you know, it was. He isolated himself,
right.
and he was in bed for a few days, but it slowly got worse and he couldn't breathe. So his wife called an ambulance, and he went into hospital, and he was still getting worse, and they put him on a ventilator, and unfortunately he had a heart attack and passed away. But there was no problems with his heart. There was nothing wrong with him. It's just the COVID it's something that it does to muscles and in the heart, and that can happen. But I didn't expect it to happen. In fact, you know, as I say, now I think maybe had we. Could you have done that? Could you have done that yourself? When you think about the government, could you have said, or any one person said, no, I'm going to lock down? And there's a mass of people in the government.
People with underlying health conditions did, and I know a lot of people. I think we did take our children out of school before we had to, just because you were listening to. But that's the problem with 2020 hindsight, is that what you need is clarity and leadership.
Definitely.
And that's not what happened, and it does seem. I'm going to ask you this, and I, if you don't want to answer it, that's fine. But would it make? I asked the first caller this today, Colin. Actually, would it make any difference to you if they apologised?
Not really.
No,
not really.
Doesn't really butter any parsnips.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You know, I've got really nothing against the government, but the fact that the shutdown didn't happen, and how many other people, like my son, passed away through not doing the law, putting the lockdown on earlier.
You're a good man, Colin. Thank you. I'm so
Thanks
sorry.
very much,
well, I'm so sorry for your loss. You know that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I really am. It's just one of the worst things ever, isn't it? To lose a child, 11:49, however old the child may be. And I apologise for crashing. I apologise to Keith, I suppose, and everybody else for crashing all over my junctions today, even more than usual. But I haven't quite developed the knack of being able to cut people off when they are, or move on gently when people are sharing quite emotional contributions to the programme, but that means I should probably be a little bit more on the ball about what time it is before I take the calls. Also, as ever on the programme, when I'm doing a bit of mea culpa, I'm not reading out enough texts or tweets, so I'll read this one out from Wayne in Basildon. I know what you're thinking, preferential treatment. You're probably right, but it's very nicely put. He says, I do love how @Theo Usherwood maintains true professionalism in the face of @Mr. James O.B. being a complete on air on LBC. He is a credit to the station. I can't imagine anybody listening to the programme would disagree with anything in that tweet, least of all me. Back to this question of how, really, or if you were writing an essay, Sixth Form Politics in 2030, when the joint report into the coronavirus response was published and painted the government in the most appalling light, despite being conducted or led by two former Conservative ministers, why did everybody in Brexit Britain know that there would be no punishments? Why did they know that, despite people like Matt Hancock coming out in January and saying they were really very well prepared? Do you remember Jenny Harries? 26th of March, 3 days after the first lockdown, testing and contact tracing are no longer appropriate. And the World Health Organization plea to test, she opined, was directed at less developed nations. Jenny Harries has now been promoted. She's the chief executive of the UK Health and Security Agency. It's a miracle she's not in the House of Lords. Karen is in Bremerhaven in Germany. Karen, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
James, you were asking about that moment when,
yes.
When did it happen that we don't expect them to be punished anymore for, misdemeanors isn't putting it nearly strong enough. I think it was Brexit. Do you remember the morning when they announced the result, how Michael Gove and Boris Johnson were both stood there like rabbits in the headlamp?
Yes, I do.
And then they weren't seen anymore for the next 2 days. And then when they came back, they probably thought, well, I can't believe my luck. If we can get away with this, we can get away with anything. That was their Donald Trump moment of shooting someone on Fifth Avenue.
And then the Theresa May Period was a postponement then.
Aye.
Oh, well, then I owe Louise an apology, actually. So, well, no, I don't owe Louise. Well, maybe I do owe Louise an apology, but she was arguing there'd been a general attrition of standards with a few points of acceleration, Richie suggests. And you're pointing out that the B word was the biggest point of acceleration of all. We just didn't realise how far we'd fallen until Theresa May had finished having a go at trying to limit the damage or hold things together.
Yes, I think so. Because as well, I think that, when David Cameron had that really stupid idea of the referendum, when was it, 2013, 2014, and he announced it, I think that's when, people in the ERG probably started already sharpening knives, and Farage as well,
So there was an abnegation of sort of knowledge or responsibility, claiming that because I believe it is true, that took hold. And I do I'd take that back to climate change. Actually, I wouldn't take that back to Brexit at all. I don't know if you saw one of the Tufton Street outfits that used to claim climate change wasn't real has now completely changed its name and its purpose and is claiming that climate change is real, but we're spending too much money on trying to fight it. The shamelessness is endemic, so we're never going to find one root cause of it, are we? But
no, probably not. But
the B word. Well, I'm not going to argue with you, and I can't imagine you were expecting me to, Karen.
No.
On this occasion, thank you very much indeed. Richard's in London Bridge. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Richard.
Yeah, I really just wanted to echo the sentiment that a number of your callers have already made this morning.
Go on.
I guess, firstly, I lost my father in the first phase of the pandemic in early April, when there was a lot of ambiguity about what care they should provide to people, how resources available to people, hospitals, etc. And this question about how the government should be held to account, I've tried to answer that question. Yeah. Myself and my sister have been part of the bereavement committee, which has been asking the government serious questions about this, and we were continually told that it wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
A number of people that were involved in resolving a pandemic would have to answer questions in this committee, so it's been deferred. And
how do you feel this morning? How do you feel this morning, having seen it or heard some of the content?
It's an emotive subject, James, so I'll try to just keep to the facts on it. Okay. But the main reason why I wanted to call you actually was to answer your question with a question, which is, why do you think that this government, what is it about them that they don't want to hold them to account? Or if a Labour government was in power at the same time, do you think the standards or that it would be held to would be different? Do you think the media would have held someone like a Jeremy Corbyn to a higher standard of if they had presided over a debacle like this to the same extent?
It's a false analogy, really. If Jeremy Corbyn had been elected despite being useless, while enjoying the support of 80% of the British media and having his incompetence and dishonesty not just excused but completely trumpeted by the British media. And I mean, tragically, of course, he was not anti-Brexit at all, privately or politically, and that failure to point out the lies and the deceits of Brexit is what greenlit that passage into Parliament for Boris Johnson. But let's pick an Ed Miliband or a Gordon Brown. And no, you wouldn't. Well, I could make the same point. For me, as the lady Karen in Germany just said, the problem is that they put him in Downing Street. So if the media had put a Labour Prime Minister in Downing Street on the back of all the lies of Brexit, then they would actually be behaving the same. That's why the really early caller who talked about, I think it was Darryl actually, who talked about the traditional political divisions no longer having any meaning, the Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, it does all go back to the B word. I wish it didn't, because God knows I'm more sick of talking about it than anybody else is. But look at what Murdoch did, look at what Paul Dacre did, look at what the Daily Express did, look at what most people in my line of work did. They put Brexit over the line, and then in order to postpone the admission that Brexit was a disaster, they put Boris Johnson into Downing Street. And in order to postpone the admission that Boris Johnson is a disaster, they had to wade through a lot of the catastrophic handling of the pandemic in the very early days. Because the minute they start asking, hang on, is he completely useless? Then they start asking, hang on, is that massive thing he sold us last year completely useless as well? So I understand your question. I hope that's an answer.
And I guess this is the teachable moment, right? I think this is the most important thing that can come out of this. is that the public need to realise that politics is not a popularity contest. It's an important job, and you need people that are up to the job to do it. Otherwise, when the next pandemic or issues actually come around, if you have people in government that are not competent, that affects all of us, personally, professionally, in all the capacity. And I feel that the onus is like people, myself.
Yeah, but
media,
you have felt it personally, and a lot of people haven't, and it will be a heck of a lot easier for them to either look the other way or to evade responsibility or to sign up to some ludicrous slogan like he was doing his best or world-beating than it ever could be for you. And I guess the responsibility does lie with people who do what I do for a living, people like me, maybe even me, not getting these points across, not reaching enough ears, not getting the truth in front of enough eyes in order to prevent this from happening. Because today, a lot of people would argue what's happening in the schools in this country is almost identical to what happened in the country at large with regard to just letting people get infected in the hope that it would somehow all come out in the wash. Richard, I mean, you did ask me, so I was going to apologise for getting so political, but you did ask me a very specific and political question, but it is relatively trivial, hugely trivial really, in the context of your loss, for which I offer you my most sincere condolences. Thank you, Richard. 12:02 is the time. And on that note, actually, perhaps on that note, that idea of context and priorities and importance, I think the best answer perhaps to the question I've been asking for the 2 hours about how has this happened, I wonder whether the answer is because without shame we become monsters.